Have you ever wondered why your adult children seem to be pulling away from you, especially after a major life change, like losing your spouse? You call, they don't answer. You visit, they seem uncomfortable. You offer help, they decline politely. But firmly, the connection you once cherished feels strained, and you can't understand what went wrong. Your intentions are pure. You love them deeply and only want to stay close. Yet somehow the harder you try, the further they seem to drift. This distance feels like a cruel punishment during a time when you need their presence most. The truth is that many well-meaning parents unknowingly engage in behaviors that push their adult children away rather than drawing them closer. These actions often stem from love, concern, and a deep desire to remain relevant in your children's lives. But what feels like caring involvement to you might feel like intrusion and control to them. The boundaries that worked when they were young no longer apply, and the transition to relating as adults can be challenging for everyone involved. Without realizing it, you might be repeating patterns that create tension rather than connection. When you're grieving, lonely, or facing major life transitions, it's natural to reach out more frequently to those you love most. The problem arises when this reaching out crosses invisible lines that your adult children have drawn around their independence and autonomy. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to establish healthy adult relationships while still honoring the love and respect they have for you. Understanding this distinction is crucial because it shifts the focus from what they're doing wrong to how you can adapt your approach. Your relationship with them doesn't have to diminish. It simply needs to evolve. The good news is that these relationship challenges are completely reversible when you understand what's happening and why. Many parents have successfully transformed strained relationships with their adult children by recognizing destructive patterns and replacing them with healthier approaches. This isn't about becoming a perfect parent or suppressing your natural instincts to care and protect. Instead, it's about channeling those instincts in ways that respect your children's adult status while maintaining the deep emotional bond you've always shared. The key lies in shifting from control-based interactions to connection-based ones. Today, you're going to learn exactly how this transformation happens through real examples and practical wisdom. You'll discover the specific behaviors that commonly damage these precious relationships, and more importantly, the positive alternatives that strengthen them. By the end of our time together, you'll have a clear roadmap for rebuilding trust, respect, and genuine closeness with your adult children. This isn't just about avoiding mistakes, it's about creating the kind of mature, loving relationship that both you and your children actually want. If this resonates with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more wisdom on navigating life's transitions with grace and dignity. To help you see this more clearly, I want to tell you a story about a woman named Linda who found herself in exactly this situation. Linda was 62 years old and had been widowed for 2 years when she finally worked up the courage to attend a support group at her local community center. She clutched a tissue in her hand as she sat in the circle of folding chairs, her heart pounding with nervous energy. The facilitator, Patricia, was a 74-year-old retired family counselor with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Patricia had seen countless parents struggle with the same issues that brought Linda to this room. Linda's adult children, Michael and Jennifer, had been gradually distancing themselves from her since their father's death. Michael was 38, married with children of his own, while Jennifer was 35 and living with her boyfriend. What had started as small tensions had escalated into real conflict, culminating in Jennifer hanging up on Linda just the week before after another argument about Jennifer's relationship choices. Linda felt desperate and confused. She loved her children deeply and couldn't understand why her attempts to stay close were being met with resistance and frustration. Patricia opened the meeting by explaining that she wanted to share a story about a mother she once knew named Dorothy, whose relationship with her adult children had deteriorated to the point of complete estrangement. As Patricia began to unfold Dorothy's tale, Linda listened with growing recognition and horror, seeing her own behaviors reflected in the destructive patterns that had cost Dorothy everything she held dear. The story would serve as both a warning and a roadmap, showing not only what could go wrong, but also how it could be made right. Patricia leaned forward in her chair, her voice gentle but firm as she began Dorothy's story. Dorothy was a loving mother who genuinely cared about her children, she said, looking around the circle. But over time, she developed 8 specific patterns of behavior that slowly eroded the trust and respect in those relationships. What she thought was love, her children experienced as control. Linda shifted uncomfortably, already sensing where this might lead. "Let me share these 8 destructive behaviors with you," Patricia continued, "so you can understand how Dorothy lost her children and, more importantly, how you can avoid making the same mistakes. These behaviors might seem innocent or even loving on the surface, but they create walls instead of bridges between mothers and their adult children. The first thing you should never do: constantly monitor and comment on your adult children's social media posts. The first destructive behavior Dorothy engaged in was constantly monitoring and commenting on her adult children's social media posts," Patricia explained, her voice carrying both sadness and warning. She would screenshot her son's posts and send him text messages criticizing his political views or questioning his lifestyle choices. When her daughter posted vacation photos, Dorothy would comment publicly, asking why she wasn't invited and making passive-aggressive remarks about their spending habits. Linda felt her cheeks burn with recognition. Just last week, she had commented on Michael's vacation photos, asking why he hadn't invited her, and she regularly sent him screenshots of his own posts with questions about his choices. She told herself it was natural curiosity, a mother's right, to be involved. But listening to Patricia describe Dorothy's behavior, she began to see how intrusive this might feel to Michael. Social media gives us a window into our children's lives that previous generations never had, Patricia continued. But just because we can see everything doesn't mean we should comment on everything. When you constantly monitor and critique your adult children's online presence, you're essentially following them around with a clipboard, noting everything they do wrong. How would you feel if someone did that to you? Patricia paused to let this sink in before continuing. Dorothy would spend hours each day scrolling through her children's social media accounts, analyzing every photo, every comment, every like. She would screenshot posts that concerned her and create detailed messages about why she disagreed with their choices. She would comment on their friends' posts, asking personal questions and inserting herself into conversations that had nothing to do with her. The digital age had created new ways for parents to overstep boundaries, Patricia explained. What felt like staying connected could easily become digital stalking. Adult children use social media to express themselves to their peers, not to receive parental supervision. When Dorothy commented on every post or sent critical messages about what she saw online, she was treating her adult children like teenagers who needed constant guidance and correction. Dorothy's son eventually changed his privacy settings to exclude his mother from seeing his posts, Patricia said. But instead of respecting this boundary, Dorothy created fake accounts to continue monitoring his activity. She would ask relatives to screenshot posts for her and would interrogate her children about things she had seen through these deceptive means. Linda realized that her constant commenting and questioning wasn't bringing her closer to Michael and Jennifer. It was making them less likely to share openly. They probably felt like they couldn't post anything without receiving a lecture or interrogation from their mother. The thought that they might be censoring their own expression because of her behavior was deeply troubling. The key is learning to observe without always offering commentary, Patricia said. You can stay connected to your children's lives without making them feel watched and judged. If you see something concerning, consider whether it's actually your business to address. Most of the time, your adult children are capable of managing their own affairs without parental intervention through social media. Patricia explained that Dorothy's social media behavior had extended beyond just commenting. She would research her children's friends and romantic partners online, gathering information to use in later conversations. She would compare her children's posts to those of other family members, using social media as ammunition for the comparisons she made in person. This digital detective work created an atmosphere of surveillance that made her children feel like they were living under constant scrutiny. When you turn social media into a tool for monitoring and controlling your adult children, you're violating their privacy and autonomy, Patricia continued. You're also missing opportunities for genuine connection. Instead of using their posts as conversation starters or ways to celebrate their achievements, you're turning every interaction into a critique session. The second thing you should never do: show up unannounced at their workplace or home. Patricia moved on to Dorothy's second destructive behavior, her expression growing more serious. Dorothy also made a habit of showing up unannounced at her children's homes and workplaces, she said. She would justify these surprise visits by saying she was just in the neighborhood or happened to be nearby. But these weren't spontaneous gestures of love. They were attempts to maintain control and check up on her children without their permission. The description hit Linda like a physical blow. Just 2 weeks ago, she had driven to Jennifer's apartment because Jennifer hadn't returned her calls for 2 days. She had told herself she was worried that any caring mother would check on her child, but she could still see the frustration in Jennifer's eyes when she opened the door, the way her boyfriend had retreated to another room, the tension that filled the space. When you show up unannounced, you're essentially saying that your need to see them is more important than their right to privacy and autonomy, Patricia explained. You're treating them like children who can't be trusted to manage their own lives and communication. Even if your intentions are loving, the impact is controlling and invasive. Patricia described how Dorothy's unannounced visits had escalated over time. First, it was just dropping by the house when she happened to be in the area. Then, she started showing up at her son's workplace during lunch breaks, claiming she wanted to take him to lunch, but really wanting to see his work environment and meet his colleagues. She even appeared at her daughter's gym one evening, claiming she was considering joining, but really wanting to check on her daughter's fitness routine and see who she was spending time with. Dorothy would also show up at her children's homes at inappropriate times, Patricia continued. She would arrive during dinner hours, interrupting family meals. She would come by on weekend mornings when her children were trying to relax or spend time with their partners. She once showed up at her daughter's apartment when her daughter was hosting a dinner party, creating an awkward situation for everyone involved. Linda thought about how she would feel if her own mother had shown up at her workplace or home without warning when she was Jennifer's age. The idea made her uncomfortable, yet she had been doing exactly this to her own children. She was beginning to understand that her good intentions didn't automatically make her actions welcome or appropriate. Your adult children need to be able to trust that their space is their own, Patricia said. When you violate that boundary repeatedly, you're teaching them that they can't relax in their own homes or workplaces because you might appear at any moment. This creates anxiety rather than the closeness you're actually seeking. Patricia explained that Dorothy's surprise visits often came with hidden agendas. She would claim to be dropping off a small gift or bringing food, but she was really checking to see who was there, what they were doing, and whether their living situation met her approval. She would make mental notes about the cleanliness of their homes, the state of their relationships, and any signs that they might need her intervention. Dorothy's children began to feel like they were living in a fishbowl, Patricia said. They couldn't have arguments with their partners, couldn't leave dishes in the sink, couldn't have friends over without worrying that their mother might suddenly appear. This constant state of potential intrusion made them anxious and resentful. The unannounced visits also put Dorothy's children in difficult positions with their partners, roommates, and friends. They had to constantly explain their mother's behavior and apologize for the disruption she caused. This created stress in their other relationships and made them feel embarrassed about their family dynamics. The third thing you should never do: constantly compare your adult children to siblings, cousins, or friends. The third behavior Patricia described was Dorothy's tendency to constantly compare her adult children to others, and Linda could already feel her stomach tightening as she anticipated what was coming. Dorothy would say things like, "Your sister would never treat me this way," or "Look how often your cousin visits his mother," Patricia explained. She thought these comparisons would motivate her children to be more attentive, but they actually created resentment and competition. This hit especially close to home for Linda. She frequently compared Michael and Jennifer to each other, usually holding up whichever child was currently more attentive as the good example. When Michael didn't call for a few days, she would mention how Jennifer had just sent her a long text. When Jennifer seemed distant, she would praise Michael's recent visit. She thought this would encourage them to be more considerate, but she was starting to see how hurtful these comparisons might be. When you compare your adult children to others, you're essentially telling them they're not good enough as they are, Patricia continued. You're making your love conditional on their performance relative to others. This creates a competitive environment where your children feel like they're constantly being measured and found wanting. Patricia explained how Dorothy's comparisons had extended far beyond just siblings. She would compare her children to cousins, neighbors' children, friends from church, and even celebrities or public figures she admired. No achievement was ever celebrated on its own merit. It was always measured against what someone else had accomplished. No gesture of love or attention was ever appreciated fully. It was always compared to what others were doing. Dorothy would say things like, "Mrs. Johnson's daughter calls her every single day," or "Your cousin Sarah bought her mother a beautiful necklace for her birthday. I wonder what you'll get me," Patricia continued. These comments were designed to make her children feel guilty and inadequate, to push them into competing for her approval. The comparisons created lasting damage between Dorothy's children as well. Her son and daughter began to resent each other, feeling like they were competing for their mother's approval rather than supporting each other as siblings. When Dorothy praised one child's behavior, the other felt criticized and diminished. This destroyed the natural bond between siblings and replaced it with a toxic competition for parental love. Every person's situation is different, Patricia said. Your son might live closer but have a demanding job that limits his availability. Your daughter might live farther away but have more flexible time to call and visit. When you compare them, you're ignoring these realities and making them feel like their efforts don't matter unless they exceed what someone else is doing. Patricia described how Dorothy's comparisons had become increasingly specific and hurtful over time. She would compare her children's career achievements, their parenting styles, their financial success, their appearance, and even their personalities. She would hold up other people's children as examples of what good children should be like, creating an impossible standard that no one could meet. Dorothy would even compare her children to their younger selves, Patricia said. She would say things like, "You used to call me every day when you were in college," or "You were so much more thoughtful when you were younger." This type of comparison made her children feel like they were constantly disappointing her and could never live up to her expectations. Linda realized that her comparisons weren't motivating better behavior. They were creating hurt feelings and sibling tension. Michael and Jennifer had even made comments to each other about feeling like they were in competition for her approval. This wasn't the family dynamic she wanted to create. She wanted her children to support each other, not compete against each other for her love. The fourth thing you should never do: use guilt, tripping and emotional manipulation. The fourth, destructive behavior Patricia described was emotional manipulation through guilt tripping, and Linda felt her anxiety spike as she prepared to hear her own behavior reflected back to her. Dorothy would use phrases like, "I guess I'm not important anymore," or "I must not matter to you," whenever her children didn't meet her expectations, Patricia explained. She presented these statements as expressions of hurt feelings, but they were actually attempts to control through shame and guilt. Linda's stomach dropped as she recognized her own recent text message to Michael. "I guess since Dad died, I don't matter to anyone anymore." She had sent it after he hadn't called for 3 days, feeling sorry for herself and wanting him to feel bad about his perceived neglect. At the time, it had felt like an honest expression of her pain. Now she could see it for what it really was: emotional manipulation designed to make Michael feel guilty and respond with the attention she craved. When you use guilt as a tool to get attention or compliance, you're essentially holding your emotional well-being hostage, Patricia continued. You're telling your children that they're responsible for managing your feelings, which is an unfair burden to place on anyone. It also teaches them that your love comes with strings attached, that you'll only be happy if they behave exactly as you want them to. Patricia described how Dorothy's guilt trips had escalated over time, becoming more dramatic and manipulative as her children learned to resist her initial attempts. When simple expressions of hurt didn't get the response she wanted, she began making more extreme statements about being forgotten, unloved, and abandoned. She would reference her age, her loneliness, her health concerns, and her fears about dying alone to make her children feel guilty for living their own lives. Dorothy would say things like, "I suppose I'll just sit here alone on my birthday since no one cares about me," or "I might as well cancel my doctor's appointment since I have no one to drive me," Patricia continued. These statements were designed to create panic and guilt in her children, to make them drop everything and rush to her aid. The guilt trips often came with implied threats about Dorothy's health and well-being. She would mention feeling dizzy or having chest pains in the context of feeling neglected, creating fear in her children that their lack of attention might literally harm their mother. This weaponized their love and concern, turning their natural worry about her health into a tool for control. Emotional manipulation might get you short-term attention, Patricia said, but it destroys long-term trust and genuine connection. Your children start to feel like every interaction with you is a trap, where they might inadvertently trigger another guilt trip. This makes them want to limit contact rather than increase it. Linda could see how her guilt-inducing messages were probably making Michael and Jennifer feel anxious about talking to her. They never knew when a simple conversation might turn into an emotional minefield where they were made to feel guilty for their normal adult lives and responsibilities. They were probably walking on eggshells, carefully monitoring their words and actions to avoid triggering another guilt-laden response from their mother. Dorothy's guilt trips also taught her children that her emotional state was their responsibility, Patricia explained. When she was happy, it was because they had done something right. When she was sad or angry, it was because they had failed her somehow. This created an unhealthy dynamic where her adult children felt constantly responsible for managing their mother's emotions instead of focusing on their own lives and relationships. The manipulation became a cycle that was difficult to break. Dorothy's children would respond to her guilt trips by increasing their contact or attention, which would temporarily satisfy her need for control. But this positive reinforcement only encouraged her to use guilt more frequently and more intensely when she wanted a response. Over time, the guilt trips became her primary method of communication with her children, poisoning every interaction with manipulation and emotional blackmail. Patricia shifted in her chair and continued with Dorothy's remaining destructive behaviors, her voice carrying both sadness and urgency. Now let me share the final 4 behaviors that completed Dorothy's path to losing her children, she said. These last 4 are often the most damaging because they strike at the heart of trust and respect in adult relationships. They represent the deepest violations of boundaries and the most harmful forms of control. The 5th thing you should never do: make major decisions about their lives without consulting them. Dorothy's 5th destructive behavior was making major decisions about her children's lives without consulting them first, Patricia explained, leaning forward with intensity. She once contacted her daughter's employer to request time off for a family event without telling her daughter. Another time, she scheduled a doctor's appointment for her son because she was worried about his health, calling his physician directly to discuss her concerns and even providing her own assessment of his symptoms. Linda felt another wave of recognition wash over her, this one accompanied by a deep sense of shame. Just last month, she had called Michael's doctor after he mentioned feeling tired and stressed during a brief phone conversation. She had been genuinely worried about his health and thought she was being helpful by gathering information and expressing her concerns to his physician. She had even made suggestions about tests he should have and treatments he might need, providing the doctor with her own detailed observations about Michael's appearance and behavior. It had never occurred to her that this was a massive violation of his privacy and autonomy. When you make decisions for your adult children without their knowledge or consent, you're treating them like minors who can't manage their own affairs, Patricia explained. Even if your intentions are loving and your concerns are valid, you're crossing a fundamental boundary that exists in all healthy adult relationships. You're essentially saying that your judgment is more important than their right to make their own choices about their own lives. Patricia described how Dorothy's decision-making overreach had extended to virtually every area of her children's lives. She had contacted schools about her grandchildren's education, calling teachers and administrators to discuss curriculum concerns and behavioral issues without her children's knowledge. She had called her son's boss to explain why he had been late to work, creating an embarrassing situation that undermined his professional credibility. She had even made appointments with financial advisors on behalf of her daughter, claiming that she was concerned about her daughter's spending habits and wanted professional guidance. Dorothy would research medical specialists and make appointments for her children, then inform them after the fact that she had taken care of their health concerns, Patricia continued. She would contact utility companies to dispute bills she thought were too high, call insurance companies to make claims on their behalf, and even contact their landlords to complain about maintenance issues. Each time, Dorothy justified her actions as helpful intervention, but her children experienced them as humiliating intrusions that undermined their competence and independence. Linda thought about how mortified Michael must have been when his doctor mentioned her call. She had probably undermined his credibility with his healthcare provider and made him feel like a child who couldn't advocate for his own health needs. The doctor might have questioned Michael's ability to accurately report his own symptoms or manage his own care. The realization was painful, but it was also clarifying. She could see how her well-intentioned help had actually harmed her son's dignity and autonomy. Your adult children need to be able to trust that you won't go behind their backs to manage their lives, Patricia continued. When you make decisions for them without their input, you're undermining their confidence and independence. You're also putting them in embarrassing situations where they have to explain to others that their parent overstepped boundaries, which can damage their professional and personal relationships. Patricia explained that Dorothy's interference had become increasingly bold over time. She would contact her children's romantic partners to discuss relationship concerns, call their friends to gather information about their activities, and even reach out to ex-partners to get their perspectives on her children's current situations. She would make reservations for family gatherings without consulting anyone about their availability, book travel arrangements for her children without their permission, and make major purchases for their homes without being asked. Dorothy once contacted her son's mortgage company to discuss refinancing options because she thought his interest rate was too high, Patricia said. She provided them with financial information she had gathered from looking through his mail during a visit, and she even submitted a preliminary application on his behalf. When the mortgage company called her son to follow up, he was shocked and humiliated to learn that his mother had been discussing his private financial affairs with strangers. The impact of these decisions went far beyond the immediate embarrassment they caused. Dorothy's children began to feel like they couldn't trust their mother with any information about their lives because she might use it to take action without their consent. They started hiding their struggles and concerns from her, knowing that sharing their problems might result in unwanted interference that could make situations worse. The sixth thing you should never do: share their personal problems with extended family and friends. Moving on to the sixth destructive behavior, Patricia's expression grew even more serious. Dorothy had a habit of sharing her children's personal problems with extended family and friends, she said. She would discuss her son's marriage troubles with relatives during family gatherings and talk about her daughter's financial struggles with neighbors over coffee. She justified this by saying she was seeking advice or prayer support, but she was actually violating their trust and privacy in the most fundamental way. This description made Linda squirm uncomfortably in her chair. She regularly discussed Jennifer's relationship issues with her sister during their weekly phone calls, analyzing every detail of Jennifer's interactions with her boyfriend and sharing her concerns about their future together. She talked about Michael's work stress with friends from church, describing his long hours and difficult boss while seeking their prayers and advice. She told herself she was seeking wisdom and support from people who cared about her family, but she had never asked Jennifer or Michael for permission to share these private details of their lives. When you share your adult children's personal information without their consent, you're treating their private lives like public property, Patricia explained. You're also teaching them that they can't trust you with sensitive information because you might share it with others. This creates a barrier to honest communication and intimacy in your relationship, because your children learn to censor what they tell you based on who else might hear about it. Patricia described how Dorothy's sharing of personal information had created a network of family drama and gossip that followed her children everywhere they went. Relatives would approach them at family gatherings with unsolicited advice about their personal problems, having heard details from Dorothy that were never meant to be public knowledge. Friends and neighbors would make comments about situations they shouldn't have known about, creating awkward and embarrassing encounters for Dorothy's children. Dorothy would share deeply personal information about her children's mental health struggles, relationship problems, financial difficulties, and career challenges, Patricia continued. She would discuss her son's depression with extended family members, describing his therapy sessions and medication in detail. She would tell neighbors about her daughter's miscarriage, sharing intimate details about the emotional and physical recovery process. She justified these conversations by saying she needed support and prayers, but she was actually betraying her children's trust in the most painful way. The sharing of personal information had far-reaching consequences that Dorothy never considered. Her son stopped telling her about problems in his marriage because he discovered she had been discussing them with his aunts and uncles at family reunions. When he and his wife went through a difficult period, relatives began taking sides and offering unwanted advice based on the one-sided information Dorothy had provided. This created additional stress in his marriage and made family gatherings uncomfortable and tense. Dorothy's daughter became guarded about sharing financial concerns. After learning that Dorothy had told neighbors about her struggles with debt, Patricia said, the daughter discovered that Dorothy had been discussing her financial situation when a neighbor approached her with an offer to help, revealing that they knew intimate details about her credit problems and bill payment struggles. This revelation destroyed the daughter's trust and made her feel exposed and vulnerable in her own neighborhood. Linda realized that her habit of sharing her children's problems with others was probably making them less likely to confide in her. They might be censoring what they told her, knowing that it could become family gossip or prayer requests that exposed their private struggles to a wider circle. She thought about how violated she would feel if her own personal problems were being discussed by relatives and friends without her permission. Your children share personal information with you because they trust you and value your support, Patricia said. When you pass that information along to others, even with good intentions, you're breaking that trust in a fundamental way. You're also potentially embarrassing your children and putting them in awkward situations with family and friends who now know private details about their lives that they never chose to share. Patricia explained that Dorothy's sharing had become compulsive over time. She would discuss her children's problems with anyone who would listen: store clerks, hairdressers, people she met in waiting rooms. She would frame these conversations as requests for advice or prayers, but they were really opportunities for her to receive attention and sympathy as the concerned mother of troubled children. The seventh thing you should never do: refuse to acknowledge or respect their romantic partners. The seventh destructive behavior Patricia described hit Linda like a punch to the stomach. Dorothy openly criticized her children's spouses and partners, Patricia explained. She would exclude them from family photos, make disparaging comments about their backgrounds or families, and generally treat them as unwelcome intrusions rather than important people in her children's lives. She never missed an opportunity to point out their flaws or question their suitability for her children. Linda felt a familiar sting of recognition that was becoming increasingly painful with each behavior Patricia described. She had been cold to Jennifer's boyfriend since they started dating 2 years ago, making subtle criticisms about his job as a freelance graphic designer, questioning his financial stability, and making disparaging comments about his family background. She had also maintained a distant relationship with Michael's wife Sarah, never quite warming to her despite 5 years of marriage and 2 grandchildren. Linda would make subtle comments that undermined their marriage, questioning Sarah's parenting decisions and making comparisons to other daughters-in-law she knew. When you reject or criticize your adult children's romantic partners, you're essentially rejecting your children's judgment and autonomy, Patricia continued. You're saying that you know better than they do about who they should love and build their lives with. This creates a terrible conflict where your children feel forced to choose between your approval and their own happiness, and they will almost always choose their own happiness, which means choosing their partner over you. Patricia described how Dorothy's rejection of her children's partners had been systematic and cruel. She would make snide comments about their appearance, their education, their career choices, and their families. She would exclude them from holiday celebrations by scheduling events when she knew they couldn't attend, or she would invite them, but make them feel so unwelcome that they would choose not to come. She would refuse to include them in family photos, literally erasing them from the family narrative. Dorothy would openly discuss her children's partners' shortcomings with other family members, building coalitions of disapproval and creating an atmosphere of hostility, Patricia continued. She would compare them unfavorably to previous partners, to other family members' spouses, and to an impossible ideal that no real person could ever meet. She would question their motives, suggesting that they were only interested in her children for financial gain or other selfish reasons. The rejection of romantic partners had created lasting rifts in Dorothy's family relationships that extended far beyond just her interactions with the partners themselves. Her children began excluding her from events where their partners would be present, choosing to celebrate holidays and special occasions without her rather than subject their loved ones to her criticism and hostility. They stopped sharing happy news about their relationships because they knew Dorothy would find something negative to say or some reason to worry. Dorothy's son eventually stopped bringing his wife to family gatherings because Dorothy would make subtle digs about her cooking, her appearance, and her parenting throughout the visit, Patricia said. The wife would leave these gatherings feeling hurt and attacked, and the son would spend days afterward dealing with the emotional fallout and trying to repair the damage his mother had caused to his marriage. Linda understood that her cold treatment of Jennifer's boyfriend and her subtle criticisms of Michael's wife were probably driving her children away from her. They didn't want to expose the people they loved to her judgment and disapproval, so they were choosing to limit contact rather than subject their partners to uncomfortable family dynamics. She was forcing them to choose between her and their romantic relationships, and she was losing. Your children's romantic partners are not your choice to make, Patricia said gently but firmly. Your role is to support your children's happiness, even if their choices wouldn't be your choices. When you criticize or reject their partners, you're damaging your relationship with your children and missing opportunities to expand your family circle with new people to love and cherish. Patricia explained that Dorothy's hostility toward romantic partners often became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By treating the partners poorly and creating conflict, she would contribute to relationship stress that sometimes led to breakups. Then she would use these breakups as evidence that she had been right about the partners all along, never acknowledging her own role in creating the problems that led to the relationship's end. Dorothy once told her daughter, "I told you, he wasn't right for you." After the daughter broke up with a boyfriend following months of family tension created by Dorothy's hostility, Patricia said, Dorothy never recognized that her own behavior had contributed to the relationship problems. Instead, she used the breakup to justify her interference and criticism, which only made her daughter less likely to introduce future partners to the family. The 8th thing you should never do: threaten to cut off communication or support. When children set boundaries. Finally, Patricia described Dorothy's 8th and most destructive behavior, her voice heavy with sadness. When her children tried to set boundaries or disagreed with her decisions, Dorothy would threaten to cut off communication or support, she said. She used silent treatments, threats to change her will, and declarations that she was done with ungrateful children whenever they tried to establish healthy limits. This was her nuclear option, the ultimate weapon she would deploy when all other forms of control failed. Linda's chest tightened as she remembered her recent threat to stop babysitting Michael's children if he didn't start calling her daily. She had been angry and hurt by what she perceived as his neglect, and she had used her help with childcare as leverage to try to force more frequent contact. She had also threatened to change her will when Jennifer had refused to break up with her boyfriend, telling her that ungrateful children who didn't respect their mother's wisdom didn't deserve to inherit anything. When you threaten to withdraw love, support, or communication because your children won't comply with your demands, you're using emotional blackmail in its most extreme form, Patricia explained. You're teaching them that your love is conditional and that they need to choose between their own well-being and your approval. This is perhaps the most damaging behavior because it strikes at the heart of the parent-child bond and weaponizes the very foundation of your relationship. Patricia described how Dorothy's threats and ultimatums had escalated over time, becoming increasingly dramatic and manipulative as her children learned to resist her other forms of control. She would declare that she was done with children who didn't appreciate her, threatened to cut them out of her will, and use silent treatments that could last for weeks or even months. She would return gifts they had given her, cancel plans she had made with them, and make dramatic announcements about how she was better off without ungrateful children in her life. Dorothy would say things like, "If you can't respect me enough to call every day, then don't call at all." Or, "Maybe I should just leave everything to charity, since my own children don't care about me." Patricia continued. These threats were designed to create panic and fear in her children, to make them believe that their relationship with their mother was hanging by a thread that could be cut at any moment based on their compliance with her demands. The threats had a devastating impact on Dorothy's children's mental health and well-being. They lived in constant fear of triggering another ultimatum, walking on eggshells and constantly monitoring their behavior to avoid crossing invisible lines that seemed to shift without warning. They began to resent the conditional nature of their mother's love and to question whether her affection was genuine or simply a tool for control. Dorothy's threats also put her children in impossible positions with their own families, Patricia said. Her son couldn't make plans with his wife and children because he never knew when his mother might issue an ultimatum that would require him to choose between his family's needs and her demands. Her daughter couldn't commit to career opportunities or relationship decisions because she was always worried about how her mother would react and what threats might follow. The final straw came when Dorothy's threats escalated to the point where she actually followed through on them. After her son refused to end his marriage to a wife Dorothy disapproved of, she cut off all contact for 6 months, returning his letters unopened and hanging up when he called. When her daughter wouldn't break up with her boyfriend, Dorothy changed her will and sent her daughter a copy of the new version, highlighting the sections where the daughter had been removed as a beneficiary. The tragic irony is that Dorothy's threats were designed to keep her children close, but they ultimately drove them away permanently, Patricia said sadly. Her son and daughter eventually decided that maintaining their own mental health and family stability was more important than appeasing their mother's demands. They realized that they were living their lives in service to her threats, rather than pursuing their own happiness and well-being. Patricia explained that the final estrangement had been swift and complete. Dorothy's children had grown tired of walking on eggshells, never knowing when they might trigger another threat or silent treatment. They had tried setting boundaries, asking for respect, and explaining how her behavior affected them, but Dorothy had responded to each attempt at healthy communication with escalated threats and more extreme demands. Her son and daughter eventually blocked her phone number, returned her letters unopened, and refused all contact, Patricia concluded. Dorothy's attempts to control through threats resulted in losing everything she was trying to protect. She had used the ultimate threat, complete rejection, so many times that when her children finally chose to protect themselves, she had no relationship left to weaponize. As Patricia concluded the list of 8 destructive behaviors, the room fell into a heavy silence. Linda felt tears streaming down her face as she recognized herself in every single behavior Patricia had described. She could see the path she was on, and it terrified her. The thought of losing Michael and Jennifer completely, of becoming like Dorothy, alone and estranged from the children she loved most, was unbearable. "I see myself in Dorothy," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own crying. "I do all of these things. I'm going to lose my children just like she did, aren't I?" Her fear was palpable, and several other group members nodded with understanding and empathy, their own eyes glistening with tears of recognition. If you're recognizing yourself in this story and want to learn how to transform these destructive patterns into relationship-building behaviors, please give this video a like to help us reach more parents who need this message. Patricia leaned forward with compassion shining in her eyes as she looked at Linda's tear-streaked face. Linda, the difference between you and Dorothy is that you're here, recognizing these patterns while there's still time to change them, she said gently. Dorothy never acknowledged her behavior or sought help. She blamed her children for being ungrateful and refused to see her own role in the problems. You're taking responsibility, and that makes all the difference in the world. Patricia explained that awareness was the crucial first step in transformation. Many parents engaged in these destructive behaviors unconsciously, driven by love and concern, but lacking the insight to see how their actions affected their children. The fact that Linda could recognize herself in Dorothy's story meant she had the capacity for change that Dorothy had lacked. This recognition, painful as it was, represented hope rather than despair. Your children haven't cut off contact yet, Patricia reminded her. They're still talking to you, even if those conversations are sometimes difficult. This means you have precious opportunities to repair and rebuild these relationships, but it requires a fundamental shift in how you approach them, from control to connection, from demands to respect, from conditional love to unconditional acceptance. Patricia then introduced the antidote to Dorothy's destructive behaviors. She explained how mothers could transform these patterns into healthy relationship skills that actually draw adult children closer. Instead of monitoring social media obsessively, Linda could learn to engage authentically when invited and celebrate her children's independence. Rather than showing up unannounced, she could respect their space and schedule visits that worked for everyone. Instead of making hurtful comparisons, she could appreciate each child's unique circumstances and contributions to the family. The most important shift is moving from guilt-tripping to expressing genuine feelings without manipulation. Patricia continued, "You can learn to say, 'I miss you and would love to hear from you when you have time,' instead of, 'I guess I don't matter anymore.' You can discover how to offer support without taking over, how to listen without immediately sharing private information with others, and how to welcome your children's partners as extensions of your family rather than threats to your position." The session ended with Patricia giving Linda specific homework. She needed to identify which of the 8 destructive behaviors she recognized in herself and practice one positive alternative before the next meeting. Linda left feeling both devastated by her self-recognition and hopeful that change was possible. Her first step would be calling Jennifer to apologize for her recent boundary violations and asking how she could better respect Jennifer's autonomy while still maintaining their mother-daughter connection. 3 weeks later, Linda returned to the group with a completely different energy. She had made that difficult phone call to Jennifer, acknowledging her mistakes without making excuses or seeking sympathy. She had stopped commenting on Michael's social media posts and had asked permission before sharing any family updates with relatives. Most importantly, she had begun treating her children's partners with genuine warmth and respect, something that had already begun to transform the family dynamics. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect, Linda shared with the group, her voice stronger and more confident than before. "I caught myself starting to make a comparison between my children just yesterday, but I stopped mid-sentence and apologized. The difference is that I'm aware now. I can see when I'm falling into old patterns, and I can choose to respond differently." Jennifer had been surprised by her mother's apology and willingness to change. Their relationship was slowly healing, as Linda demonstrated through consistent actions that she could respect boundaries while still being a loving, supportive mother. Michael had even mentioned how much more relaxed family gatherings felt when everyone could be themselves without fear of criticism or judgment. Now, I want you to think deeply about your own relationships with your adult children. As you've listened to Linda's story and Dorothy's cautionary tale, Which of these 8 destructive behaviors have you recognized in yourself? It takes tremendous courage to look honestly at our own actions and admit when we've been causing harm despite our good intentions. But this courage is the first step toward healing and transformation. The beautiful truth is that awareness combined with genuine commitment to change can repair even severely damaged relationships. You don't have to be perfect starting tomorrow, but you can begin making different choices today. You can choose respect over control, connection over manipulation, and trust over fear. Your children are not trying to hurt you when they set boundaries. They're trying to build healthy adult relationships that can last a lifetime and bring joy to everyone involved. How are you going to apply these lessons in your own life? What will be your first concrete step toward healing and strengthening your relationships? With your adult children? Maybe it's apologizing for past boundary violations, or perhaps it's simply stopping one of these destructive behaviors and replacing it with a positive alternative. The choice is yours, and the power to change is in your hands. Remember that change is always possible when it comes from genuine love and humility. Your children want to have good relationships with you. They need their mother in their lives. But they need a mother who sees them as capable adults, worthy of respect, not as children who require constant management and correction. Take the brave step that Linda took and choose growth over defensiveness, love over control, and connection over manipulation. If this story has inspired you to examine your own relationships and commit to positive change, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more wisdom on navigating life's most important relationships with grace and dignity.